Hey folks, this is Steve, and before we jump into today's show, I just wanted to let you know that we had a little bit of audio difficulty when we recorded the show, but I think it's a really good topic. There's a little bit of a hum in the background, so I want to apologize to you. This is not the normal type of quality that we like to put out with our show, but I think it's a really good topic, and Brett and Christy hit on some really good points about traveling solo. So if you would, bear with us this week, and I hope you enjoy this show, and we will get things straightened out and look for a little bit better quality in the shows to come. So once again, thanks for coming back and taking a listen, and now on with the show. Well, hello, and welcome once again to the DCL podcast, where we're inviting you to sit back, relax, and we'll be on our way shortly. Well, welcome back to the DCL podcast, and I'm kind of excited about this topic. This is going to be a little bit different topic, something that I don't think I've ever seen really touched on before, but I kind of got the idea as Brett was on earlier when we talked about his transatlantic cruise, and that is talking about cruising as a single traveler. But before we get into today's topic, I'd like to introduce to the show the co-host of the show, Christy Puttick of PackYourPixieDust.com. How are you doing today, Christy?
I am well. Nice to be back.
Yeah, it's kind of the end of summer and things are kind of winding down, and I know that you've got a lot of people booking vacations, and it's been kind of crazy, huh?
It has been really crazy.
Yeah, and I'd also like to welcome back to the show Brett from Wisconsin. How are you doing today, Brett?
Great, thanks for having me on again, and good to chat with you too, Christy.
You too, Brett.
When Brett and I did his trip report on the transatlantic, the idea kind of came to me as we're sitting there talking. And Brett, you didn't travel by yourself on this. You traveled with your parents, and you've generally traveled with your parents, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, but currently you're single, and I don't mean to get into...
Ooh, are we playing matchmaker?
Yeah. I didn't mean to get into your relationship status that way, but I got to start thinking that, one of the things that we have never really talked about and really is not marketed at all as far as DCL and Disney Cruise Line goes are the single travelers. And I know that there are travelers like that. When we were just on the Mediterranean cruise, we were on one of our shore excursions, and I sat and talked to a woman that was on the excursion with us, and she was traveling by herself. And so as I was talking to Brett about his transatlantic cruise, I thought this might be kind of a fun topic to talk about, and I thought that you could probably shed a little bit of light that way, Brett.
Yeah, I certainly hope so.
Well, let's just talk about what Disney does offer for single travelers. And this first topic, or the first part that we're going to talk about, is the 1820 Society. That's not necessarily geared specifically towards a single traveler, but it really is generally made up, I'm going to guess, of single travelers. And now it's been a while since you've taken part of the 1820 Society. And before we even jump into that, Christy, why don't you explain what the 1820 Society is?
So it is for those cruisers who are between the ages of 18 years old and 20 years old. So not quite old enough to go drinking at the bar and too old to go to the kids clubs anymore. So it is advertised in the Navigator for basically, okay, here's a meeting place. Come and meet other people in the same age range. And then Brett can tell us, though, what happens once you get there.
Yeah, I know it's been a little bit since you have probably taken part in this group, Brett, but you have in the past done it, and what were your kind of thoughts and experiences?
Yeah, and it's really evolved over time. So I think the first 3 cruises I went on, I participated in this. So this was more like the early 2010s. And back then it was actually, I think, under the umbrella of like 18 to 21. So it's narrowed down a little bit, because I think they want to make sure that they don't have any drinkers among the group. But the way it's really functioned in the past is generally every day they have, usually in the evening, they have a little opportunity for all the kind of college-age kids to get together and hang out. There's a member of the cruise staff who usually facilitates some of the, whether it be a game or a dialogue, and it serves as a nice outlet because there are a number of kids, really young adults, 18 to 20 years old, who are traveling either alone or with friends or primarily with their families, who just want to get to know other people roughly their age, really from all around the world. And so, as I said, there are usually, each night, there's an opportunity to hang out. Oftentimes, I know the group goes into the adult club to watch or participate in some of the games. So even though I'm out of that age range at this point, I still see a number of young adults who are hanging out together as part of that 1820 society, I should say. And what's nice in addition to that is on the C days, they generally have a lunch. So you usually meet up in, whether it be the buffet or somewhere like Lumiere's on the Magic to just grab a bite together and chat. And depending on how many people there are on board of that age range and who can participate, it can either be a very intimate group or it can be many, many tables worth of young adults. And on Castaway Cay, they have offerings and games just for that age group. So, and on top of all of this, as you can imagine, after a while of seeing some of the same people, you get to become, friends and sometimes hanging out outside of these contexts. So it's a good outlet. It's very informal, but like I said, there usually is a cruise staff facilitating or some of the programming, or at least chatting amongst the group more broadly.
Sounds great.
Yeah, and the last cruise I was on, and I've saw it, and I never really knew what the 1820 Society was. Looking at the Navigator, and then as kind of time has gone on, we did some research and found out what it was. But the last cruise I was on, twice, my wife and I, after dinner, were up in the Signals bar, kind of in the adult pool area on the Magic, and there was a whole group getting together, like you said, having one of the cast or one of the crew members kind of facilitating. It was kind of cool because it was a huge group. It was probably a good 15 to 20 young adults getting together. They all had their college T-shirts on, and it looked like they're having a good time. Just kind of hanging out, getting to know each other. I think the first time we saw it was the first night we were actually on board, and so it looked like kind of. Do you have any specific experiences? Do you remember from your time when taking part with this society?
Yeah, no, I definitely enjoyed it, and it was nice, as I mentioned, to get to meet people from not only all around the country, but even outside the United States and internationally. And gosh, I remember kind of like what you're saying. I remember one night going out to the pool with a bunch of them, and that was outside of the main structured programming or going to a movie. I made several friends throughout those different cruises, and I think I even saw, if I recall correctly, I saw one of the same people across multiple cruises. So that notion of that people who love DCL go on DCL multiple times, and certainly trying to take advantage of the programming while you're still in that age range. I know they've definitely really, as I said, restricted it to make sure that they don't have above 21, because really I remember this is maybe 6-7 years ago, them being kind of pretty open and letting those in 21, 22 participate. So that was definitely interesting. It was nice to be able to have a common time or place to get to have meals together or play games. I remember playing some of the Wii Sports games in the pub, or Jenga, or making crafts. It was just kind of a wide assortment of different things, and kind of like just being on a cruise in general, you would see the same people around the ship, so it allowed for a lot of spontaneity in hanging out too.
It sounds great. I don't know. I'm actually super impressed that they have a cast member that sort of helps facilitate activities, because I would think that's always the hardest part, that icebreaker stuff in the beginning.
Oh yeah, and it is a little bit difficult, I would imagine, but by the same token, it's always a member of the cruise staff. Usually it's maybe two or three of the many cruise staff team members, so you tend to get to know them in particular, and I became friendly with several of them during my cruises, partaking in those offerings. And what helps too is oftentimes those cruise staff members are in their 20s themselves, so there's not as much of an age gap. Certainly, we know that they're in charge, but it allows for, I think, easier dialogue because they're just beyond college age or young adult age.
Yeah, and the cast, I keep wanting to say cast member, but the crew member that was kind of facilitating the one that we saw, she was definitely, in her mid-20s or so. So she was definitely younger. So like you said, kind of, has that commonality in the age range of the people getting together. So, and that's why I thought this would be kind of a cool topic, because, you kind of go through different stages in life, and just because you happen to be single at whatever stage that is, doesn't, as you said, shouldn't preclude you or make you feel kind of left out of something that you're so passionate about, like Disney and Disney Cruise Line. At least that's kind of my thoughts. What do you think, Brett?
Yeah, no, I definitely think the notion of Disney Cruise Line typically being a family cruise is kind of a misnomer, because it's really for everyone. It's for families, it's for couples, young and old, it's for groups of friends, it's for solo people. The marketing obviously tends to cater to the family market, but it's very broad, and even the notion of a single or solo traveler tends to be kind of amorphous, because there have been a number of people I've met in kind of the singles groups or solo traveler groups that are husbands or wives or parents, and they just want to have an opportunity to get to know other individuals outside of their main traveling group or companions. So there's a lot of flexibility in that regard too.
Definitely, and I think people, and do you see this at all with maybe some of the people that you book, Christy? Do you have very many solo travelers at all?
I don't. So I guess that's not true. I have some solo travelers that are older. So either solo going with other family members, cruising them by themselves. I mean, technically my mom's a solo every time she cruises with us. So she isn't sharing her cabin with anybody and not cruising with anybody specifically, except that she's cruising with us. And I have some clients that just want to keep cruising, but I don't think they participate in the singles or in the solo activities. So a little bit older individuals. I don't have younger people. And the ones that, I have, we'll have groups of ladies, lots of ladies cruise together. And so technically they're sort of solo in that they're not there with a significant other, but they are still cruising with other people. But no, this is just not an area that is discussed much even on my end. So it's really interesting, too, to hear all the different stuff that they have.
I know when I was younger and before I met my wife, I took several trips with friends, as kind of solo, well, not solo, but, single travelers. But then I did take several trips just by myself. And, cruising was definitely not on my radar. I guess I was intimidated by it to even think about traveling solo on a cruise, because to me, I guess, back then, I kind of thought cruising as being, a big family thing to do together, or a group kind of thing to do together. Do you get that sense that things are kind of changing as far as maybe some of the single travelers that Brett, as far as cruising goes?
I really think it just comes down to what's the best fit. And kind of like what you're all saying, there are so many examples of groups of friends going on a trip together, or just kind of an assortments of groups of people. And I think we are living in a world now where travel is becoming so much more accessible, to have the world at your fingertips, and we know cruising is such a viable mechanism for seeing the world. And certainly there's been such an influx over recent years in terms of solo traveling or single traveling, and I think Disney Cruise Line represents a really good way of being able to visit different places, even if you're even if you don't have a family or significant other at the time. And for me, at least via these cruises, as I've said, I've traveled with my parents, but I think there's certainly the desire and traveling with friends, or even traveling completely by myself. I think Disney Cruise Line is a really good platform in having fun and meeting new people. Price point wise, I think it's definitely a harder pill to swallow, because if you are booking a room completely solo, you're basically paying twice the cost of a single fare. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for Disney to cater to this particular market, unless you're in a position where maybe you meet someone else prior to the cruise and decide to share a room together.
Let's touch on that topic then, as far as just like the basics of sailing single with Disney. Christy, why don't you go over how that would work as far as booking a cabin?
Yeah, so with Disney, and with most lines, actually, unless it is a cabin specified or specifically set up for a single traveler, and or there is a particular bonus that's being offered for a particular cruise, which does happen sometimes with cruise lines, you are going to pay what's called a single supplement, which, as Brett just said, is basically double the cruise fare minus the port fees and the taxes and the gratuities for the person not in the cabin. So if you are a one-person cabin, you have the same, you can pick any cabin you want, which is really nice with Disney versus other cruise lines, because some will have an occupancy restriction so that you can only go in certain types of cabins. But with Disney, you can take any cruise line, or any cruise cabin that is available, but you will pay double the price, essentially, like I said, minus the port fees. And really quick, there are a couple of cruise lines out there that on the newer ships or newly revised ships that are starting to do single cabins. So they are a little bit smaller of a cabin, and then you wouldn't pay the single supplement for it. But the price is based on a single person.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that here just a little bit later in the show, talking about Norwegian and Royal Caribbean, who have specifically built those smaller cabins for the single traveler. Another aspect, as I was kind of looking into it as well, is dining for a single traveler. And what Disney does in that aspect is, if you're going to dine in the main dining rooms themselves, what they will do is they will put you at a table with other single travelers, and it could potentially even be couples traveling together as well. So you're not necessarily going to be at a table with just single travelers, and unless there's probably room for it, you're probably not going to have a table by yourself. But that's just in the main dining rooms. Obviously in Palo, Remy, you could probably book that yourself, and then obviously Cabanas and the other food options are available for you as well. But that's what they would do as far as the dining, as far as dining goes. Do you know anything different than that, Christy?
So I think Disney is unique over every other cruise line in actually pairing people properly. So just like Steve, in the past, you've had your couples cruises where you're actually just in your table mates are other couples that are there without their kids that time. And then when you've had your boys at the table, there's other similarly aged kids at the table with you. And I would say they would do the same, obviously, if people have a solo cabin with others or other adults. It doesn't always work, but I will say overall they are unique in really trying to match people up with similarly aged people, or I guess status.
And you guys have kind of had that experience as well, right, Brett? You guys have been paired up with other families as far as when you've been on your different cruises.
Yeah, and that's been very nice and intentional. Obviously, as I've said, kind of a different dynamic, being college age or graduate school age and in my 20s, and thinking, are there going to be other 20-somethings traveling with their parents? And every time that's who we've been paired with. Sometimes a little bit of an age difference in terms of the quote-unquote child in the family being either several years younger or slightly older. But I think, as Christy is saying, Disney is very precise in making appropriate matches based on age and family structure.
So I think that's something that you probably, I know we were kind of a little intimidated about going to the table the first time when Anawake and I went on the cruise together here just recently. But as you guys have all talked about and we've seen in the past, they generally do a really good job of putting you with people that have some kind of similarities, so that the conversation seems to pick up right away and kind of flow if you're kind of outgoing. So something not to be too nervous about, and it's kind of cool that they do that. Now, Brett, you've had it on the last cruise, your transatlantic. I know you had a chance to. Now, Disney does have some other programs besides the 1820 Society. So as cruisers get a little bit older, they do have a couple other programs available on board for singles to meet up. And why don't you talk a little bit about your experience with that?
Yeah, and I've participated in this a couple of times, I think, over different cruises, or over a couple of different cruises, I should say. We're kind of akin to the 1820 Society. Disney has similarly structured get-togethers for single or solo travelers. Same format, where a lot of times they are lunches on sea days. So needless to say, on the transatlantic, there were a bunch of those. And in addition, they sometimes have meetups at, whether it be the coffee shop, so like Cove Cafe, or in other settings as well. Problem is, kind of like with 1820 Society, it's very much hit or miss in terms of attendance. You can either have a huge group, or it might only be one or two people. So case in point, I went to a lunch the first sea day, and it was maybe 7 other people and myself, and a couple of them were completely solo travelers who I hung out with at other points in the voyage, but at other times they were just moms who just wanted to get away from their families for a bit.
I am now officially a single traveler.
Yeah, actually, it felt like at one point it was a lunch, and it was like me and the cast of the Golden Girls. So it was like women in their probably 60s and 70s, and whether traveling with their families or on their own. And it was very, very nice. But yeah, the composition can definitely be very interesting. But there are a lot of opportunities to see, other single or solo travelers around the ship, and generally, kind of like with the Transatlantic, where it skews a bit more adult in demographics, you're going to see those same people at the adult open houses, in which there were more of them during the course of that particular cruise, or just other outlets going out to the adult clubs and bars and those types of settings. And I will say, too, kind of on this topic, I think one of the really great benefits that I've gone out of, not just kind of traveling as a single traveler, but just in really embracing what DCL has to offer, is getting to know the crew members, whether it be members of the crew staff or other people you see on board. So like maybe at the Cove Cafe or the baristas or other people. It makes it all the more enjoyable, particularly if you're not kind of bound by staying with a common group of people the entire time. There's really that flexibility in getting to have those conversations. So, for instance, one of the single lunches that I went to, there were no other single people, but I ended up having a great maybe 30, 45-minute conversation with one of the crew staff members. I think she was from Australia, and it was fantastic. So there's a lot of nice things you can attain from just kind of making that effort in being independent and being solo.
Yeah, those are kind of neat experiences, especially when you can get to know some of the crew members on board, I found. And so what an amazing, just kind of opportunity to sit there. And I know you're a very outgoing person, Brett, to sit there and kind of learn about that person and how she got there from Australia and whatnot. And did you see her around the ship then afterwards quite a bit? And what were your interactions like after that?
Oh, yeah. I can't remember the particular person's name, but she was lovely, and yeah, had many different interactions with her throughout the ship. And again, it's instances like that where you have more kind of individual conversations over the course of, several days. It helps in building that affiliation. And kind of on that same point about just getting to know some of the crew members, we've on 2 prior cruises, my parents and I, but also just me, became friendly with one of the crew staff members. Her name is Leslie, and she's fantastic. She's known as the Bingo Queen. She's been sailing the Magic more recently, and so we saw her on the Magic a few months ago, and she remembered us, and mind you, it had been a year or so, and gave us all a big hug and was so thrilled to see us. And mind you, over time you see a lot of different people, but having those conversations with the crew staff members can really be uplifting and positive for them as well, because it feels like a bit of an extended cruise line family. And I think being solo or being single, and you have that flexibility, you have more opportunities to chat with people, or at least even people who are traveling as a couple or family members. If you make that effort and you commonly appear in some of the same settings, that happens. It's not just limited to the dining rooms or for the kids in the kids club. It's other venues as well.
Was that Leslie? Was she the cruise director by any chance? Did she become cruise director?
She was not.
Okay.
But she's been with the cruise line for a number of years, and yeah, one thing that I am seeing a lot of now, and it's fantastic, is a lot of these cruise staff members ascending the line to where they're assistant cruise director or cruise director. So they really become a great kind of part of the DCL family and in very various positions.
So we were talking beforehand, before we started recording, Brett, and you had some kind of good ideas for people that are thinking about, taking that step and traveling solo, or maybe they have traveled solo already and are kind of looking maybe for some more ideas to kind of enhance their cruise. And I thought we could start off, you mentioned a Facebook group before we started recording. Maybe we could start with that, and then you had some good ideas once you got on board the ship to kind of like maybe open up some doors to meeting other people, or just kind of really enhancing your cruise. Yeah,
absolutely. Would love to talk about it and hear both of your ideas too. I think one fantastic avenue, no matter how you're traveling, what the composition of your group is, solo, single, family, couple, whatever, join a Facebook group. Look on Facebook for a particular sailing. So you would generally just type in the name of the ship and the date, and there more likely than not is probably a Facebook group, so you can get to chat with people in advance, or at least get a sense of who's traveling and where they've been in the past, get your questions answered. So that's going to really support any cruiser, any traveler. And then from there, once you're actually on the ship, there might be get-togethers among people from those Facebook groups. I remember just walking down the hallways, the stateroom hallways, and they're always fun to look at, right? Looking at everybody's doors and all the magnets and different knickknacks they have on there. But I remember in particular, because I think this would be very useful for certain cruisers, there was a picture of it was like someone just printed a picture from the computer of the Green Army men from Toy Story and said veterans meet up. And then it set a particular location and time. So people informally developing these groups based on just affiliation, whether they're single travelers or not. So kind of just remaining curious and keeping an eye out for things can really be beneficial.
And then once you're on board the cruise, some of the ideas you had I thought were pretty good too, as far as like the adult open houses and etc. Could you give us your thoughts on that?
Open house at the kids club.
Yeah, those are great. And like I said, you tend to see more of those in terms of frequency on those longer itineraries. But nonetheless, those adult open houses can be really positive and meeting other people. And I know the ones I went to is a lot of single or solo travelers. So there was one in I can't remember if it was Edge or Vibe, but it was all focused around improv, and it was a total blast. I have a bit of a experience in improv, so I enjoyed, and when I say bit, I mean a couple of classes, but I really enjoyed it. And so this was another outlet to kind of practice those skills with other single and solo travelers. I know one night it was in the kids club and it was themed around the Avengers, and I briefly went to that, and there were a number of others. So those are really positive. I've definitely been a huge supporter of all the different types of trivia on board. That's a fantastic and very accessible way of meeting other people, because if you're single or solo, just kind of walk over to a group and say, hey, can I join your team? And I've either been on the receiving end of that or initiated it. And it's very nice in getting to know other people that way. And you're learning about, what their interests are. So whether it's based around music or movies or Disney or sports, there's a lot of different offerings on that front.
And just a recent cruise, when my wife and I were on the Wonder, we were at one of the trivias down in O'Gills, and there was a gentleman sitting by himself, and he was like answering every question. And so we kind of coaxed him onto our team. We still ended up losing because unfortunately we put too many wrong answers down before he got on. But
oh, no.
Yeah, we ended up having a good 15 or 20 minute conversation afterwards. And he was traveling with his family, and I think that they were just kind of out doing other things at the time. So he'd come down there. He was kind of a trivia buff and really loved trivia. But it was really just a really positive experience. And I know that, like as you've kind of said, Brett, by putting yourself out there and being open to meeting other people, it's amazing kind of what can come about from that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's funny because a lot of people view me as an extrovert. I'm actually pretty introverted, but in terms of context, I feel like going on a cruise where it's a smaller group of people, or at least on the Disney ships in general, if you go into certain spaces, whether it be off time, so maybe for the trivia games or some of the other activities, it might be a smaller group of people, so it is more comfortable for someone who might not love huge social situations to reach out and get to know someone else. And again, those structured activities help, but as I said too, just chatting with the crew members, because they're really so many. I can't think of any negative experience I've ever had in chatting with the crew members, because they're all very warm and friendly, and you can strike up a good conversation with them. So there's so many different platforms, and I think that's one of the nice things about Disney Cruise Line. There may not be a ton of completely solo travelers, but generally everybody's in such a good mood that no matter your situation in which you're traveling, you generally want to get to know other people, because it's fun. It's a shared experience, and we're living in this world now where everybody is seeking more experiences than hopefully material things, and a cruise is the archetype of what a great type of experience can be. And I've met some really nice people through Disney Cruise Line, both on the staff side, but also the fellow passenger side too.
And it's kind of, you said, I'm kind of thinking about just the transatlantic cruise that you took, and that was your first time going over to Europe. Having that familiarity of, Disney Cruise Line. And I think I'm going to go back and use Jeff Curdy's thing, and you and I talked about it last time, Brett, is how, Disney does a good job of opening doors for people, and maybe somebody who is a little bit nervous about going over to Europe or someplace like that for the first time, having that comfort of being on a DCL ship, but then, taking them to new places. I just think there's so many different aspects of where this could be such a positive experience for somebody to have that, what am I looking for, kind of that home base sort of, that known to get them into go ahead,
familiar
Christy.
Feeling,
right, to get them into that new experience. So, and I'm going to put some numbers in courtesy of Len Testa and the unofficial guide, but actually the average number of singles sailing on the Magic and the Wonder on any given sailing is about 200. And it's about double that on the Dream and the Fantasy. It's about 400. So there are quite a few people that are out there sailing solo. So I hope this is a kind of a market that Disney doesn't overlook when they start to build the new ships. And before we jump into kind of a little segue here, was there any other advice that you would give some solo travelers as far as other activities on board that you've done before we kind of segue?
I would say really anything on the activity or game front is a good way of having conversations with others where, again, there's some structure to it. But like I said, too, going out to Cove Cafe or one of the bars, that's also viable in meeting other people and can be really rewarding. I've really enjoyed chatting with other solo and single passengers who go to the adult entertainment at night. So some of the comedians or musicians on board, because again, generally those types of performers have multiple acts, so easily have conversations about that. I think DCL is perfect as for someone who wants to travel solo or who is already in that position, because as both of you were saying earlier, there's that familiarity and comfort with the representation of what Disney Cruise Line is, and it's very easy. Like I said, I think there's a long way to go from a price point standpoint, and that's why thus far I've been traveling with my parents and want to be in a position where I can with my friends as well. I really think with the newer ships, it would be fantastic if they have some studio cabins. I question it just because I know the market Disney typically caters to, but I think they would really benefit from that, because I just think of my generation of people in their 20s and how much it's almost cool to be a nerd and it's cool to love Disney, which growing up I'm thinking, wow, is that ever going to happen? And now we've reached that point. There's that saturation point where there's a ton of people in that position. A ton of those people are not married or not traveling as part of a family, so they want to have a Disney Cruise Line experience, and if they can cater to that market, I think they'll reap the rewards immediately. And I think they can create programming on board to meet the needs of or desires of single people. I think there could be a kind of like how they have the Match Your Mate for the couples. They could have a dating game on board that could be themed around different Disney characters. I don't know. I think the possibilities are endless. There's a lot that Disney offers currently that is really supporting travelers more broadly, as I've mentioned earlier, with the activities and entertainment. But I think there is room for improvement. So I would really urge folks who are involved in the creative planning of the new ships and maybe even future renovations to the Magic and Dream class ships to really think about the needs of all the different types of passengers that sail with them.
Let's segue just real quick and talk about two cruise lines, Norwegian and Royal, who have done that. Norwegian's kind of led the way, and I think that they have more of the studio staterooms than Royal does. I'm not as familiar with Royal, but I know Norwegian was the first one to do it. Why don't you talk a little bit about what they offer, Christy?
So they have what's called a studio stateroom, which is a stateroom for a single, which has a double bed. They're smaller. And then the ships that have those also have a little lounge that you can go watch TV, and they have a bar in there, and it's key card access only. And the premises that you get in with your key that allows you to enter in your room. So if you have one of these studio rooms, you get to also go to the studio lounge.
I'm looking at a picture of Norwegian studio room, and have you seen these, Brett, by any chance?
Oh yes, those are what, 100 square feet or so?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty small, but I mean, you're probably, if you're traveling solo like this, you're not probably doing it to spend a lot of time in your room, but it looks really comfortable. I mean, it's got, at least it looks like a twin bed, and it's got
it's more than a twin. It's like a double bed.
Okay.
It is, I believe it's the standard bed, so the push together bed, or it's at least a bigger bed though, for sure. It is a double bed, at least. It is not a twin.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. You're right. I don't know my
okay.
beds as well, but yeah, it looks like a double bed, and it's got a sink in there, and then it looks like the shower's kind of built right there too. And then it looks like there's a door off for the restroom. But yeah, just a comfortable little room. And
maybe it's designed, the bed has to, my thought is that, what if somebody meets somebody in the studio lounge? Yeah. Gotta have room for them.
Yeah. So, but we'll leave that for another podcast to talk about. But it was talking about singles here. But anyways, but no, it looks like a really comfortable thing. And I really hope, like you said, Brett, that Disney, maybe, I don't know if they've got it in the plans. They haven't really shared this type of idea whatsoever with the new ships, but I mean, it's a huge market of people that not only have come of age and have money now that can travel and will be traveling well into the future. So, the life changes. You never know where you're going to be in life, and it would be awesome for somebody who really appreciates Disney Cruise Line like you do, Brett, and you and I do, Christy, that if we ever were in the position to travel solo, that they had the opportunity to do that, and do that, where you're not paying twice for that room. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
It does.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think there's, and I think too, if you both recall with when the Magic first debuted, they learned some things of how to modify the ship to meet the needs of the passengers and adjusted them for the wonder, similarly between the Dream and the Fantasy. So I wouldn't be surprised if the ship that debuts in 2021, if based on feedback they get on that front, if in fact there are not studio cabins, then maybe with the subsequent ships they can make some little tweaks and incorporate those touches. So you never know. They're always listening to that feedback from the passengers and from the guests, and I think the future ships may reflect that.
Well, as we close out the show today, I really want to thank you for coming on, Brett. Is there any more thoughts that you have as far as traveling solo, that any other tips or last minute things that you want to pass on for people that may be thinking about doing it but haven't done it yet?
Yeah, well, first, thanks again to both of you for having me on. But as far as remaining tips, I would just encourage any listeners, whether they are part of a family or couple unit and they want to travel completely on their own, or for those who are single, whether my age or maybe seniors or anywhere in between, Disney Cruise Line is a good way of seeing different places around the world. I think price-wise, you have to look at your situation, determine what the best way of making that happen would be, and maybe it is kind of planning a trip with friends or other people and splitting the cost, or even, as I said, meeting people through a Facebook group or some other Disney group mechanism to figure out, maybe we can travel together, maybe we can split a room, maybe we can meet up at some point over the course of the voyage. So just basically, put yourself out there. If you are comfortable with traveling completely on your own, not knowing anybody, I think Disney is going to work out for you. You will meet other people on board. It requires a little bit of just kind of attending things or putting yourself out there, but I would imagine, based on someone with my experiences who is a little bit more introverted, or even those who aren't necessarily social butterflies, or are social butterflies, you will probably meet some other really good people on board. I definitely have over my various cruises, and I think, just go to the activities, have fun, and enjoy your time, whether it is with other people or on your own, because you'll probably learn a lot about yourself in the process.
Definitely. Well, all great tips. Well, thank you so much, Brett, for coming on. What's next for you? I know the last time we talked, you guys didn't have necessarily a cruise yet in your radar. Has something changed yet, or what's kind of on your radar?
Still waiting to see what DCL might release for 2020. That's still a ways away. Yeah, definitely continuing to look at different options with Disney Cruise Line and other cruise lines for that matter, based on where I want to travel and what might be feasible. But it's continually exciting to see what DCL is debuting in terms of destinations and new things on board. So yeah, continually fascinated by all of it.
Well, thanks again for coming on, Brett. I really appreciate your thoughts and your insights. You're so very thoughtful and in the way you kind of express yourself, and that's why I really wanted you to come back on and talk about this topic. So I just want to say thank you for coming back on, and I wish you the best as you finish out your studies, and enjoy the rest of your summer, and I look forward to talking to you soon.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Steve and Christy. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming out. This was great information.
Definitely, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care, Brett.
All right, thanks, you too.
Well, that's going to wrap up our show this week. Once again, I really want to thank Brett for coming on and taking time out of his busy schedule to kind of share his thoughts about traveling solo and some of the different opportunities that solo travelers can find on Disney Cruise Line. If you've enjoyed our shows, we sure would appreciate it if you know somebody else who would like them, that you would pass them on. That helps us get the word out in the Disney and the cruising community about our show. It helps us grow the show. Also, if you have time and would like to go over to iTunes and leave us a review, we sure would appreciate that as well. So from all of us here at the DCL podcast, if you're heading out on your next trip here in the next couple weeks before our next show, all of us here would like to wish you fair winds and safe travels as you head out on your next adventure. Once again, thanks for coming back and taking a listen, and we'll see you next time on the DCL podcast.